Welcome to Business by Design, the podcast for business owners that want to start, scale, or exit a business. If you've followed us for a while, you know us as the Holistic Accountant Podcast. Same two hosts, Mena and I, same practical focus, just a sharper name for what we're really here to do. Right, let's get into today's episode. Okay, today, Mina, I would like to talk about the three killers of business. So these are the three settings that could be related to your product or industry or service that your business strategy and business model has to either deal with and accept or fight against. And it's really important. They kind of go at the heart of the Vert flywheel, which is the methodology that we use to understand business and diagnose business in terms of how do you build a stronger business that's less founder reliant. But it's really important just to make friends with the landscape, because there's some things that you're not going to be able to fight. You're not going to be able to win against, and you're better off to make friends with that and firstly acknowledge them, understand them. And then if you can't make friends, you're going to have to pivot. You're going to have to change your business model. You're going to have to change your target customer. You're going to have to change your product, your business engine, your reach strategy, whatever it might be. But you're going to have to at least deal with the realities of business. And, the way we think about it is quite often a business isn't failing because of 20 different things that are wrong. It typically comes back to one predominant issue. There's normally one weakness in a business. Now, as you dig a bit deeper and as you fix that weakness, of course, then once you make that stronger, then of course, by naturally, there's going to be another weaker element. So we're not saying that once you fix one thing, you've got a perfect business and you never need to do anything. We all know as business owners, there's always something to do. There's always something to fix. But the problem arises when a founder thinks they need to work on 20 things at once. The reality is it's the old 80-20 rule, that one thing is delivering probably 80% of the weakness, and that's where you kind of need to focus. So the three killers that we're going to talk about today: industry margins, which are really whether you're a price taker or whether you can actually set a price different to your competitors to achieve better margins. So industry margins are one thing. Underlying demand for your product or service. So do people genuinely, is there a genuine desire there? And reachability. Reachability is a big one, right? And one that can kill a lot of different businesses. So if you're going to be a mortgage lender, for example, and you're going to try and compete with NAB and ANZ and Westpac and CBA and so forth in a product that is just homogenous, it's really difficult to say you've got a better mortgage than they do. You really need to build a consumer brand. So you really need every Australian to know who you are, where you are, how to contact you, and why you're different. That's almost mission impossible. And a lot of international banks have tried it and failed, of course, because it almost is mission impossible. So that's the terrain that you as a business operates in. Now, the Vert flywheel can try and build a strategy to mitigate or expose some of these things to your advantage, but there's going to be some things that are completely unmovable, and that's what we want to talk about today. So, Mina, why don't we start there? Let's talk about industry margins.
I think a lot of business owners fall in the trap of just focusing on revenue. Now, you would have heard us say on the podcast before that, the old saying that revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash flow is reality. Now, it really comes down to this, and this is why we really wanted to highlight it as part of the Vert flywheel, because a low margin business keeps very little of what it earns. It's unstable and it's very fragile. It only takes a little bit of change in the market or in the product or the consumer take up for you to really go out of business. So thin margins are really dangerous. Actually, a story comes to mind. That's when I met with a client last week. He actually runs a very, very successful residential plumbing business, turns over in the tens of millions. And he started to focus on, or wanted to get more revenue through the door and keep his contractors even busier. And he decided to go down the commercial pathway. Now, he got his pricing completely wrong. He got his margins completely wrong. And what ended up happening is that he generated from between 24 and 25, he generated an extra $3 million of revenue and actually went down in gross profit by $2 million. Now that speaks a multitude of what could actually go wrong in such a thin thin margin business. So it's really important for you to actually understand what you're trying to achieve. When you set the price, when you understand your revenue and your margins, it's really important for you to actually understand what the underlying levers are. What drives your margins? How do you keep yourself protected from any sort of rework in the industry, any sort of warranties or any problems in the service that you're providing? Have you factored that into your pricing? If you haven't and you're still running on a very low margin, then you need to be doing something different. So when it comes to thin margins, it's either structural, so that means the industry itself is what is the problem, it's what sort of dictates the price, or it's self-inflicted, meaning the pricing or cost that derive that price for you is wrong and you need to fix that. You need to find improvements in your system, in your process, in your cogs, whatever it is, to improve your overall margin. So if you think about a supermarket, for example, it's very hard to sort of compete with the likes of the big sort of Coles, the Aldis, the Woolies and so forth. They dictate the prices, they dictate the margins, and more likely than not, they've actually got more buying capacity or power than you and can drive better margins than you as an independent grocer, for example. But if you look at what successful, for example, IGAs or similar sort of independent grocers have done, is they've pivoted. They've used the engine to pivot. They've understood that, okay, we can't compete with the majors, or not necessarily compete with the majors, but we'll offer more. We'll offer more bespoke offerings in our supermarkets. We might be a different type of cheese lines that might be a bit more artisan, or similarly with baked goods. This is what really drives them. Even with I've even seen it on the organic side of things. They've really got a big fruit and veg section that really drives organic sort of fruit and vegetables for that type of market. Again, you got to be in the right area for that, admittedly, but these are the things that some businesses can do to pivot away from competing with the big fish. So Stuart, let's talk about the second killer, which is underlying demand.
So hopefully you can see how these three business killers can really set the kind of landscape in which you're operating in. And to some extent, certainly you can use the vert flywheel to try and mitigate or offset some of these things. But you've got to really make friends with the fact that if you're in a very, very low margin business, that ultimately you have to get really good at your business engine. You've got to also have a great reach strategy, get more people volume through that business, and have an excellent team to be able to execute. But, unless that means you've got to build a very scalable business. But if you're in an industry with very thin margins and you don't want to scale a business because of all the work and risk that comes along with that, well, then maybe you've got to pivot. And so what we want to do is talk about these three killers so that people listening can be really realistic about the environment they're operating in and what they can change and what they can't change. Okay, so the next killer we want to talk about is reachability, which is really another way for saying that how easy is it for people that really need the service or could benefit from the service or product that you're offering, how easy is it them to find you? So that's inbound reach, or vice versa, or in addition to, I should really say, how cost effective is it for you to be able to reach your target audience? So when I say cost effective, for instance, you look at mortgage broking. A long time ago when I started my business, a lot of people didn't know what a mortgage broker did, and you had to actually educate them about what brokers did. That's difficult because the reachability of the audience was difficult if they didn't know what you're selling. Whereas now people understand what a mortgage broker does. And so from a reachability perspective, it's easier for me to interrupt or market to, someone that's looking for a home loan. I don't need to educate them about what a mortgage broker does. Similarly, reachability could be your key success is in building a consumer brand, so a really well-known brand. Again, if I use home loans as an example, if I want to compete with a NAB or a Westpac, I've got to build a nationally recognizable brand. That's expensive. I'm not going to be able to do that as a small business owner. So that my strategy is not going to really work. I need to then find a niche maybe that I can really build a reachability strategy around. And so it might be lawyers, for example. I'm going to market to lawyers that want to start their own firm, for example, and I'm going to do the funding around, building a firm or buying an existing law firm and building around that. That's a strategy that then I can build a reach strategy around and be able to get access to enough customers at a cheap enough price. So I'm talking talking about really customer acquisition cost here. The problem, though, with most small business owners is they just think about marketing tactics. They don't really think about reachability as either an industry dynamic or a consequence of a business model. And so what they might do is they think, oh, I'm just going to get some referrals, or, I'll do some sporadic marketing every now and again. I might sponsor the local football team, get my name out there, those sorts of things. But really what you want to do is have reach inbuilt into your business strategy, because it's a core component. So as business owners, I think we've just got to be realistic about how easy is it to get access to customers. I'll give you a very good example close to home. There's a declining number of financial advisors in Australia. In fact, there was about only 50 new advisors in the last 5 years that joined the industry, yet the population is growing and the average wealth of Australian is growing. So the education piece around what do financial advisors do, how valuable is it, that's not a difficult thing. There's plenty of people out there that want financial advice, and the Investopoly podcast is kind of our reach strategy. It's a way of getting in front of people that may or may not need financial advice in the future, and they know where to find us. And so there's a strong underlying demand and a good reach strategy that is economical in that situation. And that's the thing that can kill a lot of businesses. This is the second killer, is just not being able to get access to enough decent target customers to build a sustainable business. And Mena, maybe you can talk about the third killer of business, which is really underlying demand.
Now, you might have a product where people actually really like the idea. They really see that there's value to it, but there's not enough for them to actually dig down into their pockets and actually pay for it. Now, that's a problem. Now, it's a problem that you really need to sort of overcome, because you need to sell the idea to them that they've got a real pain by not actually having this product, and it'll solve that pain for them. The worst position to be in is actually trying to educate the market from scratch. So where you must first try to convince the people that they have a problem before you can sell them the solution. It's a really sort of slow, it's an expensive and very risky exercise, because there's a long conversion cycle as a result of it. Whereas if you're conversely in a stronger position, there's a sense of urgency. You got that frequent sort of demand, and there's an expensive problem where customers actually know that they are aware of and they're trying to solve. So let's use the example of GPL-1s, which is, for the listeners that don't know what that is, that's actually the fat reduction medication. So think of your things such as your Ozempics and your Manjaros and the like, where people know that they have a problem and they're willing to pay anything for that problem to go away. Now, what we found is obviously it's a pretty good example in the sense that, when it comes to people's health, the way that they look or anything like that, people are willing to dig down deep into their pockets, no matter the cost, and actually find a solution for it. That's a really good problem to have. That's where demand is strong, margins aren't compressed, and you're really in an industry where you're not competing with a whole lot of people. Whereas if you're trying to, for example, convince someone that they are overweight, for an example, and that they do need this to get into a healthier position, then that's going to be a much harder sell. So it's really important to understand what you're trying to sell, what that conversion cycle looks like, and whether it actually makes sense for you to undertake that sort of offering. So each killer really tells you what is failing, but not why. And the why is always either the industry or your own model and the execution of that. So before you start marketing something or before you start thinking of ideas, you really need to understand how you're going to get this out there. What's the demand for this product? What's the reach for this product? What do you need to actually expense to get to your target audience? And what's the margins look like after you actually spend all this money? What's that conversion cycle look like? So sure, it's all well and good to name the killers, but it's really useless without knowing which one is doing the most damage right now.
That's right, Mina. And just like the vert flywheel, there's always one that's the weakest and one that's not as weak, if you like. So it's rare you're going to find something there where it's even, and it's really just understanding the terrain that you're operating in. As you said, some of it's self-inflicted, some of it is industry specific. So what I would suggest the listeners do is have a think about those three killers. So industry margins. When I talk about industry margins, maybe also thinking about your own profit margins relative to the industry, underlying demand for the product or service that you're providing, and the reachability, so your ability to get in front of, or for people, target customers, to know and find and reach out to you. Think about those three killers and rate them out of 10. Obviously 10 being the highest score, being there's no issues. So if you've got very, very strong margins, you might give yourself a 9 out of 10. But if a lower rating, of course, means it's a bit weaker. And what that will do is highlight which one you should work on first, or at least which one you should consider first. And for your lowest rated, you've got to then think about whether it's self-inflicted, so whether it's part of your business model and something that you're in control, or whether it's just the industry landscape. So for example, if I look at financial planning, industry margins are relatively good across the industry. It's not necessarily a major challenge. And there's a lot of ability to build in value pricing. So there's some financial planning practices out there that will charge a significant fee relative to, what they're doing. It's all about perceived value. Underlying demand is very strong, as I've spoken about, the number of advisors versus the number of Australians wanting advice. Reachability is probably in, if you look at your typical financial advising practice, reachability is probably the main problem that they would have in that industry, in terms of how many people know about the service and the service that they're providing, and how do they inform more of their target customers they exist and why they might be able to help. So you can see it's a good exercise because it helps you focus on what is the part of the business that you could, if you focused on it, that you're going to add the most amount of value by fixing or improving it. And by looking at these three killers of business, it does give us a good sense of the landscape and to what extent can the vert flywheel help us build a stronger business. And especially over the coming weeks and future episodes, we're going to build on each of these pillars to help you better understand them and also then help us build a strategy around them. So next week, we're going to start with understanding the underlying demand in your industry or for your product and customer segment. And until then, bye for now. Thanks for listening to Business by Design. We're dedicated to producing practical, valuable insights for business owners, and this show grows through people like you. If you found something useful today, the best way to pay it forward is to leave a rating or review. It only takes a minute and it genuinely helps. And if you know of a business owner who could benefit, share this episode with them. We'll see you next week.